the reason that we're focused in this webinar on veterans and first responders is obviously that the mental illness issues affecting veterans and first responders is a significant order of magnitude worse than the mental illness that we see across the general population. I'm delighted that I've got four excellent and very relevant presenters for this session. Just running through them in the order that I'm going to ask them to speak. Dr. Stuart Saker is a psychiatrist, but importantly, he's a psychiatrist who is a veteran, and a large part of his practice is working with veterans. So he's somebody that does understand the veteran community, both by virtue of the fact that he's part of that veteran community, but also that he works specifically in the area in terms of his psychiatry practice. The second person I'm going to turn to speak is somebody who probably needs very little introduction. It's Admiral Barrie, the ex-head of the Defence Force, somebody who's had a career in the armed forces, now a strategic consultant, but also chairman of an extraordinary charity called Fearless, which works with people suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. So when I turn to Chris might like to just talk a bit about the work of that charity. And then I'm going to turn to Michael Raymond, who's a veteran, but also somebody who's had direct experience of these medicines overseas. And I'm going to ask Michael to run through the experience and why he thinks it's been important for his own journey. And then finally, I'm going to turn to Dr. Traill Dowie. Dr. Traill Dowie is co-lead of Mind Medicine Institute, which is the part of Mind Medicine Australia which focuses on education, and particularly the education of clinicians and the training of clinicians to provide psychedelic-assisted therapies as and when they become part of our medical system. I should say, by way of overview, that this is not a webinar where we're trying to say that psychedelic-assisted therapies are relevant to every veteran or first responder who's suffering from mental illness. It should, though, we believe, be part of the toolbox of the psychiatrist and the patient, so that between the psychiatrist and the patient, they can determine whether it's a relevant treatment. And if it is a relevant treatment, the patient, fully informed, can then make a decision with his or her psychiatrist about whether it's appropriate. All right, now if we can get straight into the big picture with what's happening with mental illness in our community. And these numbers are pre-COVID, and you'll see that on the left-hand side, 1 in 5 Australians suffering from a chronic mental illness. Now, this is no doubt worse now because of the impact of COVID, but even at 1 in 5, it was at alarming levels. In the central column, you'll see, again pre-COVID, 1 in 8 Australians on antidepressants, which is a number that I have to say I still struggle with because it's so high. But it gets even worse with older people, 1 in 4. And we're now seeing 1 in 30 younger people, some as young as 4, being on antidepressants. And the thing that Traill keeps reminding me is that when antidepressants first came out, the concept was you'd use them with psychotherapy, whereas now they seem to be used just by themselves. The other point I want to make from this slide is I've listed some mental illnesses down the bottom, and these just happen to be the ones where psychedelic-assisted therapies are most advanced in terms of trial results. When it comes to veterans, the numbers are much worse. You see there with the general population 1 in 5. With veterans, it's almost 1 in 2. PTSD almost 3 times as high. Alcohol disorder about 3 times as high. And importantly, comorbidities way, way higher, which makes treatment, as I understand from practitioners, that much more challenging. With first responders, I mean, it's not as high as with veterans, but it's still significantly higher than the general population. And you see that last line that there, according to Beyond Blue, a first responder taking their life every 6 weeks on average. Every time I look at this chart, I think the thing that I struggle with most is that Our veterans and our first responders are people that we owe a huge debt with as a society. They've been out there, veterans looking after our safety, and first responders as a country, and first responders, they're at the scene of some terrible things, and which most of us would find incredibly confronting, and I'm sure they do as well, but they're actually at the scene. So it's a group of people that we really are indebted to, and it's tragic to see the sort of mental health levels, mental illness levels that you can see in this chart, but in this table. Now, this is the elephant in the room, and it's this, that unfortunately treatment outcomes really haven't improved for 50 years. And they're no better than they were 50 years ago, and there's been precious little innovation over the last 50 years. When you look at major classes of mental illness, and depression and PTSD are two of them. With depression, if a person's got depression, or their son, their daughter, or family member does, then using existing modalities, there's probably only a 35% chance of that person going into remission. Now, there's a higher chance of that person getting some sort of positive response from existing modalities, but a positive response doesn't mean they're in remission. It just means they're managing the problem better. With SSRIs, which are the common pharmaceuticals used, they can have lots of side effects. Relapse rates are high when treatment stops. And with psychotherapy, it's a real challenge, because the psychotherapist has got to really get into the unconscious part of a human being's brain and help that person reorder their lives. With PTSD, and Chris will talk about this no doubt, the numbers are even worse. Remission rates, I'm told, are lower than 10%. Some professionals in this area will say they're as low as 5%. So if somebody has PTSD under existing treatments, the likelihood is that the best that can be done is to manage that PTSD rather than help that person go into remission. So the point I want to make here right at the start is, we can go on pretending that we have the treatments that will enable more and more people to go into remission. But if we continue the way we are, with a process-orientated approach from government to dealing with these problems, then it's hard to see that we're going to solve this massive problem. We need innovation in the sector, and particularly in the treatment area. And this is where psychedelic-assisted therapies are showing themselves to be so exciting and providing what should be a paradigm shift in terms of treatment options for people with key classes of mental illness. We're seeing medicinal psilocybin being used for depression, and potentially OCD and addiction, and medicinal MDMA being used for PTSD and potentially addiction. And the beauty of these therapies, and I should emphasize that, when we talk about using these medicines, it's very much as an adjunct to psychotherapy. Using these medicines by themselves is not going to, I think, be that helpful. You've got to combine them with therapy. We're only talking about 2 to 3 dose sessions. So rather than year after year on antidepressants, we're talking here about 2 to 3 sessions with the medicines, all done in a medically controlled environment, all done with medical or health practitioners in the room when the dosing sessions happen, to make sure that the patient feels safe and secure. Scaffolded on either side of the medicine dosing sessions with some psychotherapy. As I say, the psychotherapy being integral to the process. These therapies are often referred to as curative rather than palliative. In other words, they're designed for many people to lead to remission rather than management of mental illness. All the evidence says they're very safe in a medically controlled environment, and used in this way, they're non-addictive. And both psilocybin and MDMA, when used as part of psychotherapy, both have breakthrough therapy designation from the FDA in America, which is only given to medicines and therapies which are seen as being potentially paradigm shifters in terms of treatment options available to practitioners and their patients. This is how it works. As I say, 2 to 3 sessions with the medicines, with therapy either side. the right-hand side there, you can see a patient actually going through the medicine dosing session. There's 2 therapists in the room at all times. That, believe it or not, is a hospital, but it's designed to be fitted out so that the patient feels very comfortable. The patient's lying down, eye shades, may well have earphones and playing some beautiful music. And the therapists are very much there to make sure that the patient feels safe and secure in that environment. So, why aren't these therapies part and parcel of our mental health treatments now? And the tragedy, when you look back historically, is that they were increasingly becoming part of the medical domain in the 60s until Nixon's war on drugs in the late 60s. There were a huge number of patients that went through these treatments, and they were very much seen as the brave new world of psychiatry. Why did Nixon move the way he did? It wasn't based upon any evidence that we've ever been able to find of scientific merit or safety. It was all about the fact that he was facing an anti-war movement in America. The anti-war movement was led by people who were often taking recreational drugs, particularly psychedelics. And by outlawing the psychedelics, he could then move against those leaders and imprison them. So it had nothing to do with safety or efficacy. But the effect of that was to basically stop research for decades and stop or minimize medical use. And it was only really some brave researchers in the late 1990s who started the research again. And over the last 20 years, as you'll see here, we've seen a huge number of trials. And there are now, I think, about 160 current trials or recently completed trials. And you can see the various mental illnesses on that page that the trials have been directed at. The other thing that's happening now is we're starting to get momentum in a number of countries overseas, and we're seeing expanded access use, which is where a psychiatrist applies to the regulator for permission to use these therapies. Working in the US, Israel, Switzerland, and Canada. In the US and Israel, they have specific expanded access schemes designed for veterans. In Australia, we have an expanded access scheme which works at the Commonwealth level, and Stuart might want to talk about that. But unfortunately, there are blockages at the state level. Around the world, we've got 10 centres of excellence at major universities. And in various states of America, we've got these therapies starting to open up. And the Australian government, as you'll see there, because of our lobbying in Canberra, they've made a major grant of $15 million in a recent research grant round. So it's starting to open up, but way too slow, I think, for people who are suffering today. This is what Mind Medicine Australia is. We're a charity. We're focused on bringing or developing the ecosystem in Australia so these therapies can become a normal part of our mental health system. What our ambition is to see these therapies as part of our mental health system, to see much greater remission rates, so people getting out of the system because they're getting well. We want these therapies to be available wherever the psychiatrist and the patient believes they're appropriate, right across Australia, so that people can access them irrespective of whether they live in capital cities or regional areas. And we want them to be affordable to everybody in the system. So how do we do that? The first thing is that we focus on awareness and knowledge building. We do a lot of webinars. We're constantly meeting with regulators and government officials and doing presentations to psychiatrists, psychologists, psychotherapists, and developing awareness campaigns. And if you see psychedelic-assisted therapy in the media, there's a pretty big chance that we're the ones who've got the media focused on this as an upcoming therapy. The second thing, which I'm sure Traill will talk about, is professional development for health practitioners to make sure we have trained therapists. And Traill and his colleague Nigel Denning run a certificate in psychedelic-assisted therapies, which Stuart has actually done. So Stuart may well want to comment on the course. David Nutt, who's one of the leading experts in these therapies globally, based in London, Imperial College, recently described our course as, in quotes, the best of its kind in the world. We do a lot of engagement with the university sector. We were behind the development of the Neuromedicine's Discovery Centre at Monash University, which was announced last November. The reason we work in the university sector is because if we want these therapies to be part and parcel of our system of medicine, we really need the universities to be part of the leadership of that development, particularly their role in training doctors and other health practitioners and the research that they do. And the last part of the work we do is all the logistics, all the things that go into making these part of our mental health system. So, you know, working on the appropriate legal and ethical frameworks. We have the psychological support service, which is designed to support people who've taken the medicines. And they're taking the medicines illegally, but in those circumstances where they're challenged by the experience, giving them an opportunity to have therapeutic help. We've now got supply arrangements in place, subject to government approvals, for medical grade GMP, MDMA and psilocybin. We've been working through our clinicians with appropriate protocols and a rollout strategy as and when the regulatory environment opens up. That comes to the last comment I want to make, and that is that for our medical system to open up and allow these therapies to be available on a case-by-case basis, we need the medicines to be rescheduled from Schedule 9 of what's called the poison standard, where they're designated as prohibited substances, into Schedule 8, where they're designated controlled medicines. If we can make that move, then it means that permit systems open up right around Australia to enable these therapies, people like Stuart, to actually get state permits so that he can actually take advantage of his TGA approval at the federal level and actually provide this option to his patients. We put in our application in March. There's a critical meeting of the TGA's Medicine Scheduling Committee in June. At the moment, there's a public submission process where members of the public can make submissions about our applications, and we'd love you to, one, look at making submissions if you like what you hear, but two, really spread the word so we can get literally thousands of submissions into the TGA this month to really demonstrate to the government that there's lots of momentum behind these therapies. In terms of that call to action, all you need to do is go onto our website, go to the news tab, and then from there to the TGA tab, and you'll find all the information you need, and including a how-to guide and a link to the TGA submission process. And your submissions can be as short or as long as you'd like them to be. But I really would emphasize that if you like what you're hearing tonight, please get onto our website, go onto the TGA link and make a submission, because this is really a historic moment. We can end this last 50 years of inaction because of that war on drugs of President Nixon 50 years ago. And we can start seeing these therapies being available to doctors and their patients, psychiatrists and their patients, at the choice of both, if they're deemed appropriate. So without more ado, what I'd love to do is introduce Stuart. As I say, Stuart's a psychiatrist based in the Newcastle area. He's somebody that's put in a lot of the number of applications to get government approval at the federal level, or TGA approval to use these therapies. But unfortunately, because he can't get state government approval at the present time, because of the scheduling of these medicines in Schedule 9, were Stuart to actually utilize these therapies in practice, he'd be breaching, believe it or not, the recreational drug provisions, despite the federal government approval. And that would mean that Stuart would be criminally liable, and his practicing certificate, in fact, would actually be threatened. So we really need this rescheduling so Stuart and people like Stuart can offer these therapies to people who need them. So Stuart, without more ado, I might pass to you to make a few words.
Great, thanks. And thanks, Peter, Tanya, and all the Mind Medicine staff for really pushing this issue. It's hard to really work out where to start, and I might start at the present and work backwards, which is what doctors usually do. They start with the presenting complaint. Where I'm at the present, I've got 3 clinics. We do modern treatment. Most of my patients are veterans. The treatments that we're doing at the moment are transcranial magnetic stimulation and intranasal esketamine. But all of our clinics are also set up so that we could be doing psychedelic-assisted therapy as well. So the clinics, because of the S8 intranasal esketamine, they have drug safes. We employ nurses, so the registered nurses are trained in administering the treatments that we already do, but they're also very keen to learn other new treatments. And I think as the training programs expand, we'll work out ways to train our nurses for psychedelic-assisted therapy as well. So if my clinics, I've got one in Maitland, one in the Central Coast, Killarney Vale, one in Newcastle at Broadmeadow, and soon to be one in Brisbane. So if you know anyone who needs any of those, I guess, high level treatments for anxiety, depression, substance use disorder, you could email me at ssacra@hotmail.com or ssacra@brainsafe.com.au, and I'm happy to try and get any of your relatives or colleagues treated in a really modern way. Now, probably going backwards, where I come to this from is I'm ex-army, and between 2004, 2007, I deployed 5 times doing mainly general duties medical work, medical evacuation, resuscitation jobs. And then after that, I worked as a civilian contractor to defence at 1HSB at Holsworthy Barracks, also treating mainly people with PTSD, major depressive disorder, substance use disorders, other sequelae of those things, domestic violence, criminal matters, lots of Section 32 reports for police kicking indoors because someone had said it's a dangerous veteran. Maybe, maybe not. All of the misunderstandings that go on with mental health and substance use disorders. And then in 2011, I did MAPS training in Israel with Rick Doblin and Annie and Michael Mithofer. And then I did the CPAT training with Mind Medicines, finishing sort of mid last year, which was a great course and fantastic people, a really wonderful group of people. And I think I kind of changed during that course as well, because I thought I sort of thought I knew it all, and I was around those people, and I decided I really didn't know it all. And I think when you approach psychedelics, that's one of the things that you have to accept, that you don't know it all, and it's a good thing to accept. I feel a bit dissolved in the movement now, and it's nice to be talking to you, but I certainly don't have all the answers. Where we're at, and Peter gave a really good summary of where we're at. I think it's probably a pivotal time, and the stuff around the TGA approvals and also the differences between the Commonwealth government and the state governments, they're really paradoxical. And I think we're also maybe contrary to the way that the medicines are developing in other countries. I think in some ways we're a bit behind the 8 ball, and I know Mind Medicines is trying to correct that. But having been in Israel and having spoken to the Americans and where they're at, we're quite a few steps behind. But then I've spoken to some Kiwis, and we're probably a few steps ahead of them. So we might be a few steps in front of the Solomon Islands as well. Who knows? Admiral Barrie might be able to tell us about that one. So look, I'm here to learn. I'm here to provide a service, and I think our clinics are cutting edge clinics, and we're providing the best treatments that we can. And I know in the UK, Ben Sessa has set up a number of clinics called Awaken, and what he's offering at the moment is ketamine, and that's within their legal structure in the UK as well, but really he's positioning those clinics to be offering psychedelics in the future. And my patients, probably 70% of my patients are veterans. They have these sets of problems. A percentage of them get better with standard antidepressant treatments, and that's great. A percentage of them don't, and the ones who don't stay with me the longest, the ones who get better, they go back to their GPs. So I probably got a bit of a skewed view because everyone around me is treatment resistant. And if people have had surgery who are around me, they're surgical failures. So I don't really have much of a faith in surgery either, because I only get the horror stories. But these guys really need something new, and they're dying, and if they're not dying, their relationships are breaking up. They don't get to see their kids. They have stupid family law court problems that go for 10 years, and that they're not employed. It's just a slow rolling disaster. And I think our veterans interact with DVA. I think DVA is a very generous organization, and DVA, if we could come up with pilot programs, I'm sure DVA would fund those programs, and they've been really generous with funding esketamine, which is extremely expensive medication, and TMS and other new treatments. They were first adopters with Viagra, the blue pill, which they coined a condition for it called war-related erectile disorder, which meant that for most people, war didn't give you a hard on, which I accept as a true thing. But they're first adopters. So we have this apparatus with DVA that if we could come up with something sensible, they would adopt that, because they very much respond to the premise, unless you do something, some more veterans are going to die. And that's why we're having a Royal Commission into veteran suicide right now. And I think probably psychedelic-assisted therapy, I think certainly psychedelic-assisted therapy positions itself as an antidote to veteran suicide, or a preventer of veteran suicide. So anyway, I hope that gives you a bit of understanding of who I am, and I'm passionate about the issue, and I'm glad that you're all here listening. Maybe I'm preaching to the converted. But look, as I said, if you have someone local who is in need of assistance, I'm happy to take an email and help whoever I can.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Stuart. And I should have said at the start that please use the chat if there are questions in your mind that you'd like to be asked of Stuart or any of the other speakers. One question, Stuart, in terms of fully informed consent, to a veteran that's never been exposed or taken psychedelics, how would you go about explaining what they're going to go through, particularly psilocybin, because it is such an unusual experience?
Look, I think my veteran patients are really quite adventurous, and they're quite, if you can be excited about something, they're quite excited about the idea of these treatments. Often they haven't used many illegal medications, and there's a conversation that occurs. And I think the advantage of having a medical setting is you can explain that there's limits to the experience. If it's necessary, the experience could be turned off. I usually say to people, this is something which is probably going to expand your mind. It can be scary. Don't fight against it. And very similar conversation to what we'd have with ketamine. And I'm surprised with ketamine, because we give someone some ketamine and we close the door and we don't do the ketamine assisted therapy. We just leave someone with their dance music, and then from the next room, 2 or 3 minutes later, there's this really loud sobbing. And I turn to my nurse, and my nurse turns to me, and we go, "What should we do?" And I said, "Well, maybe you should go in." So the nurse goes in, and she says, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And the person says, "Nothing's wrong. This is just wonderful and wild." And I think it is very difficult to explain what wonderful and wild looks like. A lot of my patients, even with ketamine, say Dr. Saker, you should try some because this is amazing. And I say, I can't because my registered nurse, Melindy, counts the little dispensers too closely, too many times. If there are any spares, maybe I'd lie on my hammock reading my book and try one. And I think what your question also links to the Healthy Persons clinical trial, and for a legal way for doctors to be able to talk about having a psychedelic experience themselves. Because, I mean, some people couldn't care less talking about it, and they'll talk about every drug they've ever used. And I mean, it's pretty hard for the New South Wales police to charge you for something that you said you once did. But for a lot of doctors too, their professional image is linked to them behaving in a non-criminal manner. So I think when I can try some of these medicines through the Healthy Volunteers trial, I will. But people accept, you're going to go on a ride. People sign the consent, and people have been prepped with these medications for years. People have watched so many documentaries from the UK now, and they go, why aren't we in a clinical trial? Or my patients are demanding the treatments. And also, I think one of the issues for, say, the veterans is that they don't know how to demand in a really politically coordinated way. They're always too divided among themselves, like Navy, Army, Air Force, or special forces or non-special forces, or infantry versus non-infantry, infantry versus pogues. I'm a pogue. But there's so many divisions that ex-military people have never really been able to become political. I think they could become political. I just went to Anzac Day. There were 20,000 people on the street. So it could definitely become political.
All right, thank you for that. Scott, can you put Stuart's email address in the chat? Great. All right, well, without ado, what I might do now is just pass across to Admiral Chris Barrie to talk about how I should say that Admiral Chris Barrie was a founding director of Mind Medicine Australia. And we've benefited over the last 3.5 years from advice from Chris and his understanding of trauma. But Chris, I'll pass across to you to talk about whatever you think is appropriate and useful.
Okay, look, first of all, I'm really delighted to be part of this webinar because I think this is a very important juncture that we're at. For the reasons that we've tried hard to get a change to the scheduling, and we're still at it. And we're constantly frustrated by the people who don't want this to proceed. I should explain, first of all, I'm not a treatment specialist, and I'm not a health professional. And unlike Stuart, I'm not the kind of guy who can actually help you professionally. But I think what I do know is that when we founded Fearless, we branded Fearless particularly to encourage people to be a bit bold and to take their life into their hands and try to seek help where it was needed. And it came out of my perception in about 2012 that we had a very big problem with the constant deployments of the ADF people into Iraq and Afghanistan. And I know some special forces people who have been out on 12 of those deployments. And to be brutal about it, I think that's unconscionable. And our country expects people to go out 12 times and put their life on the line for us. Seems to me to be seriously bad news. And furthermore, of course, even though we called about the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, nothing changed back here in Australia, except if you lived in a defence family. And so it was that as part of the walk up to Anzac Day in 2015, the centenary of Anzac and all of that thing, I became interested in what I could do to help. And I guess in my imagination, to try and head off the possibility of another Hoddle Street massacre. Some veteran picks up a weapon and goes out on the street and shoots a lot of people. And I thought if that happened on my watch and I hadn't done anything about it, I couldn't live with myself. But once I got started, I discovered some very unusual facts. First of all, the number of veterans on our streets and serving members in a cohort in PTSD is about 70 to 90,000. But across our community, we talk in terms of 1.5 to 2 million sufferers. And in our community, I'm talking about our first responders, of course, our AMBOs, our firefighters, the paramedics, across the whole range, emergency services and so on, and our coppers. And I had the privilege of sitting at a round table of police in 2018. And I can tell you that hearing some of their stories and watching them weep as they're telling these stories is very heartrending. And a difference that I would make between our ADF, very highly trained people who go out into places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and police, is that we have systemic training and we're given a very good idea of what we're going to expect. But if you're a police person and you're going off to house X, you have no idea what lies behind the front door. And so every situation for them is unique. The second problem we have in our first responder groups is there's no real reserve capacity. They're expected to be at work on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and to deal with the bad end of our society on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And that's why I feel so very sorry for them. And I think the suicide rate amongst first responders is extraordinary, as it is with our veterans. Now, what have we discovered in Fearless? The first thing we have discovered, or learned, I suppose, not discovered, is that every case of post-traumatic stress disorder is unique. It depends on the nature of trauma, maybe one event, maybe a succession of events, and the lived experience of each individual. And I know trauma surgeons who have PTSD. I know of people who treat people with PTSD who have PTSD. And PTSD doesn't distinguish by ethnicity or income or calling. It affects a lot of people. The second thing I know from the work we've done is a lot of other people get affected by PTSD because they live with people with PTSD. And if there is a cohort of people in our community that need a lot of help, it's the partners and the kids and the people who live with the people who are sufferers, to understand what they're going through and try to be able to contribute to their lives in some sensible way. The third thing we discovered is that when people talk to each other about their lived experience, it in some way or another helps relieve the burden. We've had a series of webinars recently involving people who carried their PTSD for decades in their lives, unable to take a job for longer than a few weeks, unable to have a relationship, unable to lead a healthy, vigorous life. And some of the stories about how their burden of PTSD is resolved might be learning about forgiveness, learning about speaking up and being out there and doing something good in the community, learning about sharing your thoughts with the people that your loved ones, the people who live with you, the people who share that burden. And then finally, looking into the medical community and what is now on offer. You know, the issues of post-traumatic stress disorder in the Australian community, and I think there is a link between PTSD and suicidality and the suicide rate. I think there are links between some of the other comorbid conditions, PTSD and those outcomes. But looking at our mental health picture across the board, I can't help but wonder to myself, how can it be in a country like ours, where we have, in most cases, a wonderful environment to live in, a lot of space for people to go and enjoy. We have a very high income per person, across the board. We're supposed to have one of the world's best health systems, and yet we've got a terrible mental health record. How can it be? And that's where I think the whole idea of psychedelic-assisted therapies and what's on offer with the work that Mind Medicine Australia is doing is a real game changer. Imagine that you can go from having to take some kind of pill every day that isn't doing you very much good to take 2 or 3 supervised sessions and then be released from the burden, potentially for months on end. Or, to paraphrase Professor Jim Logopoulos, the director of the Thompson Neuroscience Institute on the Sunshine Coast, begin the research and the treatments with a view to getting a cure for PTSD. And Jim is not saying it's absolutely certain, but he is utterly convinced that without doing the research and without using the tools such as MDMA and psilocybin that are on offer, we're not going to advance very much beyond where we are now. And finally, why do I think this is so important for our country? Well, first of all, we've got to cut down the suicide rate. We've got to nip this really seriously, because when you look at 21% or 22% suicidality, that's not acceptable, and it requires us to really do something about it. Secondly, these are productivity issues. When people feel well, they work well. And if we're lucky with the use of psychedelic-assisted therapies, people will be able to continue to work in their chosen work environments instead of feeling guilty about how they feel and having to be moved on either into unemployment or into some other occupation. And finally, surely, all of these people might be able to benefit from leading a much better life anyway. So I don't think this is I think it's a no-brainer. We need to get every bit of help we can to persuade the TGA, the delegate in TGA, that a change has got to be made to enable Australian professionals around our land to begin the research and treatment that we need to carry out. So let's join with the effort. This is an action plan, and we got only a few weeks to work on it.
Thank you very much, Chris. That was beautifully spoken, and both in terms of the reality of trauma in our community, but also this being something that's really important to happen soon, so that our health practitioners can start working with people who would like these therapies and be given a chance to get well.
I think that's a story of hope, Peter. We've got to give people hope.
Indeed. Now I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to pass to Michael Raymond, and Michael, if you could just say a few words. I mean, you're sort of amongst the speakers, sort of unique, because you're a veteran and you've also experienced these medicines, and they've impacted you. So maybe just, if you can, just describe why you sought access to these medicines and how you found them.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So I found myself at the end of a 16-year career in the Air Force, struggling with some mental health issues, and it did feel like I'd been kind of band-aiding up my mental health and trying a lot of avenues within the medical system to try and heal and continue with my career, but nothing seemed to work, and I wasn't able to unfortunately go on with my career. So I was discharged, and I found myself with another set of problems, which is that transitioning from the military life into the civilian life, which, if you're in good mental health, those problems alone, it's quite an adjustment, especially if you've joined from a young age and kind of been conditioned in that way of the military life, and and you transition out, there's the combination of both, you know, the mental health issues I was battling from, you know, some traumatic events and just the operational intensity and a whole varying set of reasons. I found myself just in the pits of mental health and just really giving up. I gave up hope. I gave up, just hope of rehabilitating. I felt like I'd reached out and tried mindfulness and read books and all those things, and you know, and I found myself in a place where I thought I wasn't going to come back from, and it was just a last hope, a last ditch effort to jump on a plane and head over to South America and try these therapies, which I'd heard a little bit about, and I held little hope, but I thought, if I try that, I've tried everything. and I went over there and I experienced it through the traditional framework in a reputable retreat over there. And I tried a number of therapies, including ayahuasca and San Pedro, and they're very, you know, chemically similar to psilocybin and MDMA, from what I've heard. And for me, I experienced, like, it was tough. The sessions were quite, you know, at times they were challenging, but it was able to crack through these walls I'd been holding up, walls that I wasn't even aware of. It seemed to break me out of, you know, I've heard a lot of people talk about the default mode network and being caught in this echo chamber. It seemed to really break me out of that. And within after the first session, I woke up in the morning and I felt renewed. I felt like just a really big relief and a big unburdening of a weight of what I was carrying. And it felt really transformative. And it just, I found myself after a few more sessions and then returning to Australia, talking about it and really wondering why it wasn't available here. And especially after seeing a lot of people in my community, in the veteran community, struggle, the statistics, I reached out to My Medicine and contributed to the healing stories and thought, you know, I'm not a frontline bloke and I haven't been through as much as a lot of those people on the frontline experience and the levels of trauma that they've experienced. But I thought there just wasn't any other veterans speaking out about this. So I decided to share my story a bit more openly and in the media, and hopefully help break down the stigma and maybe potentially pave a way and help get these medicines, you know, to veterans, or as you said, Peter, add another tool into the toolbox to approach this problem of mental health in the veteran community.
Well, thank you, Michael, for those comments. And it does sort of beg the question, you know, why is it that if I'm an American veteran or first responder, or now a Canadian veteran or first responder, or an Israeli veteran or first responder, I do have a chance of being able to legally apply through my psychiatrist for access to these therapies as part of the medical system. But if I happen to be an Australian veteran or a first responder, the only way I can access these therapies is to either get on a plane and go to South America or places like Holland where they're legal, or alternatively go underground. And, you know, the problem that we have with the underground is not that there aren't good therapists there, but the reality is that veterans and first responders through their psychiatrists should have this as an option through the medical system, so they can be confident about, firstly, that the purity of what's being given to them, but secondly, that their health practitioners have been properly trained in the use of these therapies. And that's a great segue into our last speaker, Dr. Traill Dowie, who, as I say, is leading our therapist training course through My Medicine Institute, and is a great thinker on this topic. So, Traill, over to you.
Thanks, Peter. First of all, let me say, just how blessed I feel to be in the panel today with, three men who I respect a lot. Know Stuart a little bit, and have a lot of respect for him and the work he does. Got to know Michael just recently, and just hearing Admiral Barrie speak there, I was roused. I was like, yes. I've worked clinically as a therapist with soldiers and Defence Force personnel quite a lot. My clinical specialisation has been in the area of trauma, and I guess sitting here with you, as someone who sits on the outside of those experiences for first responders and defence personnel, I just want to name that I feel like it's outrageous. It's outrageous that the clinical evidence of this, to my mind, is clear. It's clear. The MAPS in the United States has just finished their phase 3 trial results, which show nearly 90% of people get marked life improvement from one treatment protocol following a psychedelic-assisted therapy model. Nearly 70% of those people escape diagnostic categories. We're not talking over years. I mean, the average number of years in those trials, those people have been diagnosed for 14 years on average, and the highest was 22 years. We're talking about 22, 23 weeks of treatment. These people are recovering. Under what circumstance and what kind of country and what kind of culture do we send people into harm's way? And then when they break from the pressure of it, because we know clinically that trauma is not a question of if, it's a question of when. And Chris was, mentioning that, 12 deployments, that's essentially guaranteed to create massive psychological harm. And so we know all of this. We send these people off, and then when there's treatment available, we fail those same people by retreating into bureaucracy, conservatism, or whatever it is. And we don't pay attention to the individual lives. And this is the thing that I don't understand. Each death is a tragedy. Each of these people who die is tragic. These people deserve better of us and better of what we do. And we have a clinical tool available. This is not mumbo jumbo. This is not witchcraft. This is not, some out there thing. This is something that's been developed for a long time. We have clear protocols. We are training clinicians in it. We now have about 150, 200 clinicians on the way to being trained. We can help these people. And I want that for those people. And I think that it's deserved. And, I just hope that, every day that this takes is a day that we lose people, and that's not acceptable. It's not okay. And we just have to do better. And, I guess my gratitude goes out to all of you for the varieties of your service. If, and if you're on here because you're caring for people who have gone and served, my gratitude goes out to you because they deserve that as well. So that's all I really want to say about it, but it's I feel very strongly about it, as you can probably tell. So please follow up. Let's get behind the TGA's kind of process here. Let's follow what Peter's going to speak about in a moment and really take action and not sit back, because we all need to get involved in this. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for those words, and I think everyone on the call can understand why we're so lucky to have Traill and his colleague Nigel Denning leading the therapist training course, because there's not only lots of compassion and drive, but there's a deep understanding of what it takes to work with traumatized people and use these medicines as part of therapy. And I might just ask you a question, if I may, Nigel, because you've taught me a lot in terms of the therapeutic process. Just talk a bit about, because a lot of people on this call and a lot of veterans generally have experience of going to therapists and trying to talk about these sorts of issues. Just talk about how the therapeutic approach is different.
Yeah, so I mean, we understand that what happens when people become traumatized is a series of neurophysiological problems that underlie it. And so this mid-region of the brain, amygdala, you guys might have heard of that. It becomes overstimulated in response to novelty, and it's what develops the fight or flight response. And it's the accumulative pressure of this which essentially causes PTSD. Now, when you take a medicine like MDMA, you get two things that are really important happen. You get a down regulation of the fear response. So it allows you to approach terrible memories and experiences without being overwhelmed by them like you normally would be. And at the same time, what it does is increase your relationality. So it allows you to move into relationship, to be held and supported and protected as you're going through this experience. And in that in-tuned environment, it allows people to metabolize what has been too difficult for them to experience. It allows them to work it through. So that's the kind of basic mechanism it works by. And so it's not just the medicine itself, but it's the medicine coupled with the therapeutic process. And one of the problems in conventional talking therapy is it's all up here. So often it sits up here as a cognitivized process. But when we're talking about trauma, it's become very popular now. We understand that it's embedded in the body itself. It's a reactive state within the body. And we have to get that out. We have to work that through. And there's a number of other therapies that you can use in alliance with the medicine to help that occur. And if we're able to do that and then add some key therapeutic points of integration where we stabilize that experience so it doesn't just come and go, but we actually get it to stay, then we're talking about massive changes in people's lives and in their functioning. And again, the great travesty here is we know how to do this. We're not like figuring out, well, how do we do this? What do we do? Like, we know how to do this. It's just the political will to actually allow people to have access to it that's the problem. And I think that's the really important thing to understand about it. It's not to say that talking therapies are bad, because they're not. What the medicine sessions do is they augment and allow what happens in a conventional therapy setting to really work. I think about it like it's supercharging the whole therapeutic process. And that is a very, very exciting and powerful thing for us to offer people who are suffering in this way.
Thank you, Traill. If I could just emphasize here that we are definitely not suggesting that people go out and find MDMA on the black market and take MDMA. MDMA, if you get the dosage wrong, can be toxic. And it can often be adulterated, and MDMA without that therapy which Traill's talking about is not going to help you. It's the combination of the two in a medically controlled environment with trained therapists or experienced therapists like Traill that make all the difference.
That's right, Peter. It's very important that it's done with, sometimes we talk about like the therapeutic complex, that it's all of these things together. It's not that this is a panacea. It's not that somehow this molecule is going to take it all away, because it doesn't do that. But when it's coupled and put into a therapeutic process where we're using all our knowledge of psychological practice, all our knowledge of pharmacology, all our knowledge of neurobiology together, we're able to create really, really important change.
The other thing, Traill, we just might touch upon is that, during the medicine session itself, which is, maybe eight hours long, there's a lot of time for interaction between the patient and the therapist. So do you just want to say a few words about, you always talk about it being non-directional.
Yeah. Well, sometimes we talk about doing, not doing, but that can be misleading because people make it sound like they're just sitting back and, reading a book or something. It's definitely not that. What this is all about is what we call this notion of therapeutic, attunement or presence. And in the therapeutic space, what's happening is we're really working together. We're not interrupting, we're not pushing, but we're really following and tracking. And sometimes you'll hear people talk about holding space. And it's through this experience of being held in safety that actually allows the process to really flourish and allows the therapeutic process to really be maximized. And so, when we talk about non-interference, it doesn't mean being non-relational. In fact, it is often the most profoundly relational experience that people have in their entire life. And often a lot can be said verbally, but often a lot can be said without words. There's often this profound reciprocity of relationality that develops between the person having the experience and the therapist. And you know, people will sometimes go inward, and they're doing inner work. They'll have eye shades on, and they'll be going inward, and we just sit and we hold, present, and we're attuned. And then other times they come out and they want to share and they want to talk, and they're going through a memory, and then we work, you know, in a more classical therapeutic sense. And then they go back in again, and then they come out again, and so on and so forth. And so it's a very intense experience. And, you know, I have to say, like, working in those registers and getting to see that work, you know, it's beautiful. It's a privilege. And it's something which is really, really important for us to give people the opportunity to have access to.
Well, thank you, Traill. I should just say or comment on something that Stuart said earlier, and that is that in relation to the therapist training course that we have, it's a 16-week course. Most of it's online, but there are residentials as well. Holotropic breathing is a way that people on the course can experience altered states quite legally, but there is now ethics approval to enable graduates of the course, if they want to actually experience these medicines in a controlled environment, so they actually understand what the patient's going through.
Yeah, let me say here, Peter, if we have people who are working with first responders and veterans, and this is something which appeals to you and you're interested in, please come and do the program, come and do the course. But we need people. We need you, the people who are interested in wanting to do this. Like, you know, this is not some, you know, money-making scheme. This is not something which is designed to do anything but really change the landscape of mental health in this country and really do something really powerful and important for people who deserve better. And so please, you know, if you have any questions, reach out to us. I'm happy to talk to you. I'm happy to, you know, answer any of your questions. The program is fantastic, and we're really proud of what we're doing, and it's something that I think can make a difference.
Thank you. And certainly the testimonials we get from people who've done the course are extraordinarily positive. You know, many talk about this as being the best professional development course that they've done. And, you know, hearing Traill, I think you can see the passion, but also the deep knowledge and understanding of these therapies and what it takes to be a good practitioner. I'm getting a question on the chat about this process that we're in now, this public submissions process, which Chris referred to. The TGA, in response to our applications, has called for public submissions, so for submissions from any member of the public to understand what you need to do. As I say, go onto the Mind Medicine Australia website, go to the news tab, and then the TGA tab, and in that section you'll find a how-to guide and all the links that you need. It's not and I can see that Scott's got ahead of me there, which is great. He's actually put the link, a link to this on the chat. It's a very easy process, or we've made it very easy for you, but really important that you know, if you are a person who's suffered from mental illness, or you've got a family member or a friend, talk about that in your submission. Talk about the need for innovation. Talk about the safety and efficacy, which you'll find details about on the site. And just talk about the urgency, because I think sometimes what I find really frustrating about this sector is there seems to be no urgency. And, you know, people are dying and people are living lives that they don't deserve to live, when, as Traill quite rightly says, there's a therapy that's available, you know, provided, you know, it's deemed appropriate by the psychiatrist and the patient. And it really should be part of the armoury of the health system. And we need to really be pushing this sense of urgency, that we need it now, we don't need it in 5 years' time. As I say, this is an incredibly important time for us. We'll know the final decision on this in November. And, you know, if we don't get the rescheduling in November, we'll have to go through another process, which will take another 1.5 years. And for every month that goes by, as I say, there are some people will commit suicide, and others will lead lives that they don't deserve to lead because of this lack of access to these therapies. A lot of information on our websites, so please work through it. But as I say, we need your help now. We'd love you not only to put in a submission, but to reach out to your colleagues and friends and get them to do the same. And let's inundate the TGA with really good submissions so that the TGA and the politicians and the public servants generally realise that actually the time has come and we need this as part of our mental health system. What I might do is just see if Chris or Traill or Michael or Stuart would like to make any closing comment, because I'm conscious that we're getting very close to 7:15. And if there are any other remaining questions, please put them on the chat, and we'll either respond to them verbally as part of this call, or we'll respond through the chat. So I might just start, if I may, Chris, with you. Any closing comment you'd like to make?
Yeah, look, I've wondered to myself why it's been so bloody difficult to get anything done about this. And my answer is that we have become a very risk-averse society. When I look at Australian bankruptcy law, years ago, I tried to get a change so that we could have venture capital like they do in the United States, where they have Chapter 11, Chapter 12 provisions for dealing with bankruptcy. I failed in that one, and here we are yet again, taking so bloody long to do anything about making these changes so that our qualified people can get on and do the research and the treatment. And it's because if somebody holds up their hand and says no, we somehow think that's more important than the 100 people who say yes. I mean, it's ridiculous. That's the truth. And as you say, there are people out there hurting and hurting badly because we are not enabling them to get all the treatments that they deserve.
Thank you, Chris. Michael, any closing comment you'd like to make?
Yeah, I just encourage people to, have open conversations about these therapies with people. Point them towards organisations like Mind Medicine, and yeah, because they planting those seeds and those conversations and sparking, not from a point of a pedestal or anything, but just having open conversations and asking questions and hopefully encouraging people to explore it and maybe sharing that these are having some pretty amazing outcomes. It's that helps as well, I feel.
Right. Thanks, Michael. And Traill, any closing comment from you?
Well, yeah, I mean, let's do better. Let's pressure the people who are not leading and demonstrating what this looks like, in the real world to do better. Let's pressure those people to do that. But also, let me say thank you for taking the time today. Really appreciate having an avenue to kind of speak and be connected to you. And if you are a person who is here because you're struggling or things are tough, please don't lament. Reach out, get help, get support. There are services available, there's help available. Please just, hang in there. This stuff is coming, and we're working excuse the French, we're working our ass off to make that happen for you. So just want to let you know that.
All right. So look on my side. Please get behind this submission process. It's a real opportunity as part of the process to give feedback to the TGA and the relevant people involved in the decision making. We need as many submissions as possible, and we need you, if you want to make a submission, to also reach out to your colleagues and friends and associates. Look, I just want to close by, a thank you to, and I know I'm speaking for all the panelists, a thank you to all the veterans and first responders on this call. The service you provide is extraordinary, and we're not only grateful, but we want to make sure that veterans and first responders who need help can actually access these therapies if they're appropriate in the future. I want to also thank all the health practitioners on this call. I know there are quite a few by the questions who work in this space, because you do extraordinary work. It's really hard, and at times it must be pretty confronting. And again, I just want to thank you all for your passion, your compassion, and the way that you support people who need your support. Please get behind this, and let's make it happen. And let's get many more people well and out of the system, And even for those who don't go into remission, let's at least get them to the stage where they have far more positive responses and can lead the sort of fruitful lives that we all want them to lead. So with that, I might close, but thank you for being part of this. Hopefully you're inspired to get involved in the submission process. There is real hope on the horizon, but to make it happen, we've got to convince our regulators and our politicians that the time has come. And in my view, the time has truly come, and we've got to go for it. So thank you very much for being part of this.